New stewardship means a new opportunity to take a look at the cards that have been banned in Commander. Hello everyone, my name is Braden, I'm the meeple on duty today, and I wanted to take a moment, now that the Commander drama has sort of subsided, to review the current Commander ban list and see if there are any cards on it that could be unbanned when Wizards of the Coast takes a look at the current ban list and makes adjustments to the philosophy and banned cards for the Commander format. I'm not going to go into any more detail on the drama or on the Rules Committee's version of the philosophy, as is noted here on their website. There's not really a lot of good reasons to do that right now, so instead I'm just going to take a quick look at the cards that are currently banned, which are listed in alphabetical order below here, and we are going to review the description of why the card was banned, which a cool feature put out by the Rules Committee. I used to go to the MTG Salvation forums archive posts to get explanations for why cards were banned, and this is a much cleaner, more concise, more reliable way to get that information from years and years ago. So, without further ado, I am going to go into this with the note that this discussion is not going to include any cards that aren't normally legal in Commander, so silver border cards, acorn cards, gold cards, conspiracy cards, anti-cards, or any of the 7 cards Wizards removed from all formats due to being racially or culturally insensitive. So we're going to start with Ancestral Recall, the first piece of Power 9 we're going to talk about, and one of 8 pieces that have been banned in the format. This card's been banned since Commander's inception, and is listed as being originally banned for poor optics rather than power level. While it's plenty powerful, it's the effect on perceived barrier to entry that really posed a problem because casual players watching Commander games in passing could reasonably assume that they needed hundreds, now thousands, of dollars in Power 9 mana as table stakes just to join the format. Ancestral Recall was an iconic and expensive card at the time it was banned, and removing it from the card pool was intended to combat the notion that Commander is a prohibitively expensive and inaccessible format. For the most part, I agree with this assessment. A 1-mana blue instant that lets you draw 3 cards, or I guess an opponent draw 3 cards if you're feeling particularly spicy, has no restrictions, can be played at any point in the game, and will likely catapult you far ahead of the table, is probably too powerful for Commander, although I do feel that its impact is tempered by being in a multiplayer environment. Despite the power creep of recent years, this card's rate on draw power is unparalleled, and I'm cool with this staying banned, though I do think it's on the lower end of the power scale compared to some of the rest of the Power 9 that are on this list. But we'll talk more about those as they come up. So our next card is Balance. A 1 and a white sorcery. On its face, Balance looks like a very effective catch-up strategy that's mechanically very white, but in practice it leads to slow, long games with a low density of meaningful decisions or memorable events. Players are often left with little to no resources and little to no cards in hand, feeling like they don't have any agency in the game they're playing. For a 2-mana sorcery, each player chooses a number of lands he or she controls equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. So this is a card that rewards you for hemorrhaging out your hand, typically with artifacts and enchantments and planeswalkers, before your opponents get a chance to do so, and then it takes away all the resources from your opponents that are in excess of yours in those 3 categories. So lands, creatures, and cards in hand. This tends to be played, ironically, in one of the more unbalanced ways, almost all the time if you're playing it correctly. I don't see this card ever coming off the ban list for good reason. Next we have Biorhythm. As an 8-mana sorcery, Biorhythm can appear to deck builders as a fair and funny haymaker, but the reality is that it usually results in a disappointing twist to the game, ignoring previous gameplay to wipe 100+ life off the board. Wrath effects are a core element of casual metagames, and most often Biorhythm results in the accidental elimination of players rather than a strategic payoff. For 6 and 2 green, you have a sorcery that says each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. And this card is not fun. Cards that render an hour or 2 hours of gameplay decisions irrelevant generally have no place in this format. I think that the creature version of this, which I think was printed originally in Khans block, costs 8 mana to activate the ability, plus you have to get the creature on the board, wait a turn for it to become able to be tapped, or give it haste to bypass that so that your total cost is 10, 11, 12 mana. It's still not great, but it is a more reasonable version of this effect, and honestly, the closest version of it I would ever want to see in the Commander format. I'm cool with this staying banned. It's not fun. It sucks. Good call getting it out of the format. I do think it was actually legal for a period of time, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't think it was initially banned, but it's possible I could be mistaken. And now we have our second piece of power, Black Lotus. The description for banning it is the same as Ancestral Recall, but this card's power level is off the scale. In addition to being just a crazy iconic card in Magic as a whole, Black Lotus is going to catapult you so far ahead of your opponents, and there are so many ways to retrieve it, copy it, and abuse it, that if you get this in the early game and can do any of those things, you'll be so far ahead nobody can possibly stop you. Due to its lack of restrictions and 0 mana cost to get 3 mana of any color, there's a good reason this card's banned. We'll talk more about its counterpart that sparked last month's drama in a little bit when we get to it. Now we have Braids, Cabal Minion. Now, this was a card that was originally just banned as a commander back in 2009, but when they merged the banned as commander and just banned in commander ban lists to be a single ban list, this card was put on that list. I'm not sure I agree with this pair of lists being merged together. I definitely didn't agree with it at the time, but the reasoning was to keep the lists simple to parse, and I can understand that. I would be cool with Wizards revisiting this in conjunction with the community when they have a chance to review the ban list in more detail. I would be cool with seeing banned as a commander come back, because there's a great big difference in accessibility between banned as a commander and being banned in your 99. Always available versus you're going to have to work to get it, or get really lucky. Anyway, Braids has a tendency to create fully locked down board states and ends games early in a remarkably unsatisfying way. Braids removes resources aggressively, meaning players are unable to keep the resources needed to remove it. First banned as a commander in 2009, when banned as a commander was removed in 2014, Braids was moved to the general ban list. For 2 and 2 black, you get a legendary creature, human minion, 2/2, at the beginning of each player's upkeep. That player sacrifices an artifact, creature, or land. Naturally, the best way to play this card is going to be to rush it out as quick as possible with enough extra stuff for you to sacrifice, so that if your opponents aren't playing fast mana like Moxen or Dark Ritual, they're in a position where they have to sacrifice some of their only resources in play, which will put you miles ahead if you can press that advantage for the game. This was not a fun card to play against. It is still not a fun card to play against in any capacity. I'm cool with this card not coming back in as a commander or in the 99 in general. This is not a fun card. Channel. I'm not even going to make you wait for my thoughts on Channel. 2 green, sorcery, till end of turn. Anytime you could activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life. If you do, add a colorless mana to your mana pool. When you start at 40 life, you can power out an Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, on turn 2 back in the day, which, I mean, it's pretty good. Emrakul was not always banned. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. This card just catapults you so far ahead. Like, having access to an extra 40 colorless mana, I guess 39 technically, because you don't want to kill yourself with the 40th, but you're going to win the game if you get this on turn 2. And as noted in the description, Channel abuses 2 important aspects of the format. Higher life totals make the life payment essentially trivial if this is played in the early game, and 2, players always have something to do with the mana, e.g. cast their commander. Channel often catapults its controller way ahead by producing huge amounts of mana. this card should not be allowed back into the format under any circumstance. I'm surprised it took till 2010 to ban it. Chaos Orb. A 2-mana artifact. Cards that require manual dexterity present unique accessibility challenges for the format. We don't want Commander to be a format that you can only play if you engage in specific physical actions. Chaos Orb incentivizes players to physically spread their cards out over a large area in order to minimize the possibility of multiple permanents being affected. At best, this is awkward, and at worst, it adds needless complexity to maintaining the state of the game. For your 2-mana artifact, you can pay 1, flip Chaos Orb onto the playing area from a height of at least 1 foot. Chaos Orb must turn completely over at least once, or it is discarded with no effect. When Chaos Orb lands, any cards in play that it touches are destroyed, as is Chaos Orb. Now, in a number of cases, particularly in Vintage, I've heard of Chaos Orb being errata to basically serve as a colorless Vindicate. I think it would be fine in the format in that capacity, though it definitely breaks the color pie. And realistically, anything that requires manual dexterity to play, I agree, should not be part of the format. It's an accessibility problem. It is a gameplay nightmare. It's a funny card, and if it were errated to basically be 3-mana colorless Vindicate, I'd be more on board with seeing it in the format, but we're not really in the business of errata cards, so I'm cool with this card just not being part of the format. Coalition Victory. So for 3, a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green, you win the game if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color at sorcery speed. Banned in 2007. Coalition Victory threatens a strongly negative experience largely out of nowhere for a casual table where the game is expected to go long enough that a spell such as Coalition Victory will be cast. In general, tapping out at a healthy life total against an opponent with nothing but any 5-color commander in play shouldn't cause you to lose the game unless you have signed up for that kind of experience, in which case Coalition Victory is far from your biggest problem. Steering folks away from this kind of experience is at the heart of what the ban list is trying to accomplish. This is a complicated card to discuss. A lot of people want to see Coalition Victory unbanned because they are fine with an 8-mana win-the-game sorcery being part of the format. They don't see it as being a particularly problematic card. But a lot of those same people seem to forget that we've gotten a lot of non-basic lands with land types since Coalition Victory was printed, and since it was banned. 2 Triomes will get you all of your land requirements in a 5-color deck, and having those and your commander in play will win you the game. Full stop. Yes, 8 mana is a steep cost, but this is kind of the same unfun card that Biorhythm is. I'm cool with this staying banned. It is not fun to deal with, and again, it's the type of card that invalidates an entire game's experience just by being cast. 8 mana, again, is fairly trivial. You have access to green, which is the best ramp color. It is not hard to get 2 Triomes with a suite of 10 fetch lands in your deck. This is a card that I don't feel should come back. It doesn't add anything to the format. And I do think its power level, while reasonable as a win-the-game condition, because, I mean, you have any number of 2-card combos that will total up to 8 mana to accomplish effectively the same thing, but they don't say win the game on them. This should stay banned. It invalidates the entire gameplay experience leading up to playing it. It's not fun. I'm cool with it not coming back. Dockside Extortionist. So, for 1 and a red, when it enters the battlefield, you create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control, for a 1/2 Goblin Pirate. Dockside Extortionist generates 4+ treasures very easily in a multiplayer game, which accelerates one player into mid-game or even late-game plays starting as early as turn 2. As a creature, it's easy to recur, and often entire games would revolve around a 2-drop. And recursion is only part of the equation here. It can be blinked, it can be returned to hand and recast. This card is super abusable, and I'm not gonna lie, it's too efficient for what it does. I've used it to just generate silly amounts of treasure, and it enables powerful plays earlier than you should be allowed to do them. and far more easily than you should really be expected to get that kind of mana. You got to work for it a little more than you do with Dockside, in my opinion, to make it a more fun game experience. I'm cool with this being banned. Of the 4 cards that were announced for bannings in September, this is one I 100% agree with. No notes. Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn. So for 15 mana, you get a 15/15 Eldrazi. This spell can't be countered. When you cast this spell, take an extra turn after this one. Flying, protection from spells that are 1 or more colors. Annihilator 6, so when it attacks, the defending player has to sacrifice 6 permanents. And when it is put into a graveyard from anywhere, the owner shuffles it from its graveyard into their library. So, I remember when this card was legal. I built Emrakul as a commander. I had a lot of fun playing Emrakul as a commander. It was actually built out of the premise that someone at our local game store said that you couldn't build a colorless commander deck. And this was back before you had Wastes, which is the colorless basic land. So your entire non-basic mana base resulted in playing a lot of subpar old lands that had really obnoxious drawbacks or were cards that could tap for any color of mana. It was a rough mana base, but even back then there were enough mana rocks and ways to accelerate your mana in colorless. 15 mana was perfectly doable. This card, once you got to 15 mana, getting to 17, 19, 21, whatever, as it was board wiped off the board, was fairly trivial. And then you always got another turn. If you happen to have Lightning Greaves, even better, because then you could get the haste and just go off to the races. That was back when I was playing cards like Akroma's Memorial on a more consistent basis. This card was good. But the problem is that it was also the best creature to win games with, even in the 99. Bribery saw a huge uptick in play because of Emrakul, and was a staple of the format for years. A card that basically let you take whatever creature you wanted out of an opponent's deck. It was also great in big creature decks. I played it in my Mael the Anima Power 5 or greater Matters deck. Card's absurdly strong, and if it hits the table, someone is going to be set back into the Stone Age, and there's not a darn thing they can do about it. It also only takes 2 hits to get the 21 commander damage in. Should it still be banned, though? We've gotten a lot of potent Eldrazi since Emrakul. The new Ulamog rivals or exceeds it as far as its ability to use an Annihilator trigger for way less mana. I'm not sure this card needs to still be banned. I think it could be unbanned on a trial basis to see how it goes. Now, that said, Annihilator 6 is absurdly powerful, and getting a time walk for casting it, also really good. Now, if you're cheating into play without casting it, it's still a 15/15 with protection from most things. It's going to be one of the best creatures in the game, period. I don't know if it's still ban-worthy, though. I would be interested to see what the thoughts are on Emrakul. I would be comfortable with seeing it introduced back into the format. If it ends up turning the format back into get Emrakul or bust, then yeah, I guess it goes back on the ban list, but Magic's a very different game than it was in 2010. A big creature is not enough to win you the game anymore. Erayo, Soratami Ascendant. This is a flip card from Kamigawa block, the original one. For a 1 and a blue, you get a 1/1 flyer. Whenever the 4th spell of a turn is played, flip Erayo, Soratami Ascendant. And when it flips, it becomes a legendary enchantment that says, counter the first spell played by each opponent each turn. This card is miserable. I have played with and against Erayo a number of times since it was banned in 2014. When played as a commander, Erayo leads decks that cast and flip her early, and leads to games where even targeted removal is often ineffective. Worse, a flipped Erayo does not always send a strong signal to newer players that the game is essentially over. The natural result is a play pattern that is nearly always one-sided and oppressive. Now, the most common combo with Erayo was Erayo and Arcane Laboratory, so everybody is only allowed to play one spell each turn, and that just locks the game down. You're the only one who's allowed to cast their one spell a turn, and you are going to grind your opponents into dust, and there isn't a darn thing they can do about it. Card is dumb. Card needs to stay banned, both as a commander and in the 99. Falling Star. This is 2 in a red for a sorcery that basically reads like Chaos Orb. So you flip it from a height of at least 1 foot. Star must turn at least 1 degree. It must turn at least 360 degrees or it has no effect. When it lands, it deals 3 damage to each creature that it touches. Creatures damaged by Falling Star but are not destroyed become tapped. Again, all the same things I said about Chaos Orb apply here. If it was errata to just be deal 3 damage to a creature, if you don't kill it, tap it, that'd be fine. If it's got the dexterity mechanic, it can't stay in the format. It's just too obnoxious. Fastbond. 1 green mana for an enchantment. You may put as many lands into play as you want each turn. Fastbond deals 1 damage to you for every land beyond the first that you play in a single turn. This has a lot of the same problems as Channel. And it's got the same reasoning to boot. Except for it often catapults its controller ahead by producing huge amounts of mana and landfall triggers. This should stay banned. It's too efficient for what it does, plain and simple. Flash. Now, this is a relatively recent banning. This was banned in April of 2020. For 1 and a blue, you have an instant that allows you to put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you do, sacrifice it unless you pay its mana cost, reduced by up to 2 generic mana. Flash effectively allows players to evoke a creature in their hand for 1 and a blue. Many formats have recognized that the mechanism that Flash uses to do this prevents meaningful interaction. Worse, because Flash's power is tied to the creatures that are being cheated into play, its power increases over time as creature designs become more powerful. This is traditionally abused with Protean Hulk, which is a 7-mana green creature that when it leaves the battlefield, you search your library for creatures with total mana value totaling 6, and put them onto the battlefield. And it's just obnoxious to deal with in that capacity, but there are other good things you can flash with this if you're trying to get around things where you're having to play creatures at sorcery speed, or you're looking to reduce their cost, or you just want an ETB effect on the cheap. This will do that for you, and it doesn't really matter what the converted mana value of your creature is, because it's going to give you its enter the battlefield effect and its leave the battlefield effect for 2 mana. That is kind of an absurd combo card. It is very powerful, but was generally more of a problem in competitive or CEDH, where it was basically ruining their metagame. So this banning was also largely done as a nod for that subset of players. But even if you're playing casually, Flash can be a very strong card. I'm cool with this still being banned. I don't think that Magic has evolved to enough of a degree in the last 4 years that introducing it back into the format is healthy for CEDH. And it's really a card that a lot of casual tables just aren't going to care about, but the higher powered ones are going to abuse it. Gifts Ungiven. 3 and a blue for an instant. Search your library for up to 4 cards with different names and reveal them. Target opponent chooses 2 of those cards, put the chosen cards into your graveyard, and the rest into your hand, then shuffle. Gift's low blue investment makes it splashable, and the instant speed means you can use it at the most opportune time with lowered chance for countering or interaction. The ability to tutor for 2 combo pieces and 2 ways to recur them generally makes this a 1-card game ender, and even in the most casual play, it's a double tutor. Especially in a color that is not known for getting unfettered tutor access. Blue is typically allowed to tutor for instant sorceries and artifacts. This lets you tutor for anything. It is absurdly strong. It would be in every blue deck at 4 mana, guaranteed, because you have enough redundancy and recursion in blue that, like it said, 2 combo pieces or 2 of what you want to do and 2 ways to retrieve it. Not hard to accomplish at instant speed, which means you'll untap and have full access to your mana to do what you tutored for immediately after playing this. It can stay banned. Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, banned in 2021. 5 mana gets you a legendary artifact creature scout. It is a 3/5. When Golos enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. 2 and Wooburg, exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn without paying their mana costs. Golos is busted. You can get any land in your deck, and then you exile the top 3 cards of your deck for 7 mana and can play them for free. So your Time Stretches, your Temporal Masteries, your whatever else, whatever expensive thing you want to play, Eldrazi, take your pick. And it's a 5-color commander, so you have access to Magic's full library in order to do whatever you feel like. And you get any land with its Enter the Battlefield effect, so you can go get Cabal Coffers, Urborg, Lotus Field, whatever you want to basically ramp your mana in absurd ways. I'm cool with this still being banned. It is not a great card to play against in any capacity. I think this was a good one to just eject from the format. Speaking of too efficient at what it does, Griselbrand, 4 and 4 black for a 7/7 flying lifelink legendary creature demon. Pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. This is a card very akin to Yawgmoth's Bargain, a card that is also banned, which we'll get to at the very end. It's just raw power. If it hits someone, you get that life, so you hit someone for 7, you pay 7, draw 7, and are miles ahead of everyone because you can play those 7 right away. It's not like Necropotence that makes you wait. And it's not like Necrodominance, which makes you wait and lowers your hand size. This is just too efficient at what it does. I'm cool with this not being allowed in the format in any capacity. It is one of the best Reanimator creatures of all time. And in the 99 or as a commander, it's just super good. Hullbreacher. Hullbreacher creates an environment of asymmetric resource denial in the early game. Its ability easily combines with several other cards to strip opponents' hands and keep them empty. This creates an environment where players don't have agency but doesn't outright end the game. Combined with its easy splash ability, it was an attractive and popular card to include in decks that were played in environments that couldn't handle it. 2 and a blue gets you a 3/2 Merfolk Pirate creature with Flash, so you can play it at instant speed. If an opponent would draw a card except for the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead you create a treasure token. This was popular alongside cards like Windfall and Wheel of Fortune, so you would empty your opponent's hands, make a pile of treasures, and outright be so far ahead, the game was effectively over. Narset, part of the Veils, also denies the ability to draw cards in a similar fashion, but it does not generate treasure, and it does not come in at flash speed, so you can't just 1-2 punch someone at instant speed with this, or in response to someone else's Windfall. Card should never have seen print. I don't know what Wizards was thinking on this one. Card is gross.
Hi, we'll bring you back to your quality programming in a moment. I am the Corrupt Overlord, and this is the business of assorted meeples, and we're here to tackle a terrible tragedy, which is the underfeeding of brownie. Did you know the average North American brown bear needs 10,000 pounds of salmon a day? Yeah, it's completely true, scientifically verified, look it up. Along with a minimum of 1,000 pounds of honey a week.
Actually, I don't think that's right.
It is right. I looked it up. Look it up yourself. Do your research. And Brownie, he needs to eat. He is obviously underfed. Do you know how much 10,000 pounds of salmon costs? It's a lot. And with bear food inflation at a 14,000% rate right now, it's just getting harder and harder to feed him. But you know what else feeds him? YouTube subscription. Look at this poor bear. If you subscribe now, you are giving us the ability to feed Brownie the massive amounts of salmon, honey, and tuna that he deserves.
Wait, tuna?
Yeah. Bears like tuna.
How much tuna?
Lots of tuna. Almost as much as the salmon.
I know that's not right.
Your mom's a source.
You leave my mother out of this.
So help us feed him with subscriptions, because the average healthy brown bear is 1,600 pounds, and Brownie's about 2.1. This bear needs his honey. He needs his salmon. Please subscribe. If not for me, and if not for Brayden, do it for Brownie.
Iona, Shield of Emeria. So 6 and 3 white for a 7/7 legendary creature angel with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a color, and your opponent's cat casts spells of the chosen color. Now, this was banned in 2019. Iona's ability to lock entire colors out of the game makes it brutally efficient at removing agency from other players at the table, especially when opponents are playing 1 or 2 color decks. This often has the effect of totally negating 1 or more players' involvement in a game and creates unnecessary social friction. I see where they're coming from with this, and I'm going to preface with Angels are one of my favorite tribes in Magic, and this is one of my favorite cards in the game, so I was very unhappy to see this card banned, especially since there are a number of ways to deal with Iona using colorless cards. I do think that the reasoning is a little overblown compared to how long the card was legal in the format, and I do feel that this has been a trend that was revisited with the bannings last month, where a card that is powerful, and these arguments are valid, why did it take 10 years to remove it if you were that concerned about it? I don't really think this card was ban-worthy. I understand why it was banned, though, and I would not be super upset to see it still be on the ban list at this stage. I mean, it's been 5 years. I've had time to get over it. But I would be delighted to see it come off, personally. A lot of people are playing 2-3 color decks, and there's a lot of 4 color decks with the partner commanders and 5 color decks running around. And again, this is a multiplayer experience. Iona is likely to be miserable for enough people at the table that it is going to be a lightning rod for removal. And if you aren't ending the game with a 7/7 flyer in a reasonably timely fashion, you're doing it wrong. Just plain and simple. Like, 9 mana in white is not always easy to get to. So I am cool with seeing this come back, in all honesty. But I'm also understanding why it was banned, because if you are playing a monocolored deck, it is a great way to just lock you out of the game. But if you're building a monocolored deck, you should already be planning a contingency or two, because cards with protection from a color are also very relevant in the format when they come up, and you need to have a way to answer those too. So I didn't really see Iona as being any different from that scenario, because the same deck building requirement is still there if you're worried about Iona. I would be cool with seeing this come off, but I'm not super passionate about it coming off at this point, to the point where I would say it's a mistake. And now probably the single most controversial ban that has hit this list. I won't say ever, but I'm thinking it pretty loudly. Jeweled Lotus. 0 mana artifact, tap, sack, add 3 mana of any color, spend it only to cast your commander. We've talked about Black Lotus already. Card's cracked. This card is specifically limited to your commander. So its power level is generally going to scale with how powerful your commander is, particularly in the early turns of the game. This, with a card like Urza, Lord Artificer, is disgusting. Using this to power out a card like Draco? Like, this is a card that allowed a lot of, for lack of a better term, janky decks to actually work. And it was played in pretty much every CEDH deck because it is a super efficient mana rock for getting your commander onto the table. This card really doesn't have a home outside commander, and while I am very much in the camp of people who have stated flat out, Wizards should never, ever, ever, ever have let this card see print. Ever. So we're clear. I do love the artwork. Like, I have a print from Elena Danner hanging in my living room. I have the oversized card from Alina Richards artwork hanging behind me on the wall. The art on this card is gorgeous. I love it. Did this card deserve to be banned in Commander? Is the format better without it gone? Are the two questions that most people have been asking. Given how long it's been around and how little I've seen it, I don't think it deserved to be banned. However, I also agree the format is probably better without it here. And I don't think those two views have to be mutually exclusive. I feel for the artists who designed the artwork for this card, as this is a flagship piece for all of them who have been involved with it. And they have every right to be concerned about how this card's banning affects their business model. But at the end of the day, a card's price should not affect its legality, and a card's tie to artists also shouldn't affect that. So I'm cool with the card being banned. I do think it was unnecessary, and I do think it was a wild shift from the philosophy that the Rules Committee had presented over the last 15 years. So I understand why this blindsided people, and I empathize with the artists who have to deal with the fact that this card is no longer legal in a format where it has significance. Gestures at, funny doubling cube deck in Legacy, that doesn't count. That said, I do hope to pick up a couple copies at some point to display alongside the prints that I'm hanging in my living room and office. Karakas. Legendary land. Taps for a white, or taps to return target legendary creature to its owner's hand. All commanders are legendary. Most of them are creatures, with the exception of a handful of planeswalkers and backgrounds. This card has no deck building cost, would go in every white deck, and would be a perfect answer to every commander ever. Should just stay banned. It just does not work with the format. And as is described, Commander is a format that focuses on legendary creatures that tie together decks thematically. Karakas is a land that can prevent a player from having consistent access to their commander and allow its controller to consistently save their commander from removal. It does both of these things for a negligibly low activation cost. Yeah, not welcome in the format. Stay out. Speaking of not welcome, Leovold, Emissary of Trest. Black, green, and blue for a 3/3 legendary elf advisor. Each opponent can't draw more than one card each turn. When you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. I've played against a lot of Leovold decks. This card is gross. If you have never played against Leovold, count your blessings, because it typically went into hardcore control decks. You could only draw one card a turn, and this was comboed with things like Teferi's Puzzle Box to basically strip away your hand, much in the same way that you would abuse Hullbreacher, which would have gone into Leovold decks perfectly. Leovold as a commander creates an environment of asymmetric resource denial in the early game, and its second ability protects itself and other resource denial pieces in play. Its first ability easily combines with several other cards to strip opponents' hands and keep them empty. This creature creates an environment where players don't have agency, but doesn't outright end the game. Yep. All the same logic as Hullbreacher. Cool with that not being here. Library of Alexandria. It is a land that you can tap to add a colorless mana or draw a card from your library, but you can only use the card drawing ability if you have exactly 7 cards in your hand. Library was for a long time considered the 10th piece of power in vintage play. Like those, it was banned to avoid the perceived barrier to entry, but was strong enough to be a candidate for banning even without the optics, especially in long games where the card draw yields inevitability over time. Combined with its colorless nature, allowing it to go in every deck, and the occasional difficulty for inexperienced players to realize that library is the reason they're losing, its place on the ban list is very secure. I don't know that I agree with this. One, Commander is consistently designed as a format where you have 4 players at the table. Yes, this card is going to be absurdly expensive. It's reserved list, it's never getting reprinted, and there are not all too many copies in the world, and even the copies you can get your hands on typically run around the 4-figure mark. This is a case where I feel that just because a card is expensive does not mean it should be banned. Yes, there are decks that can easily keep 7 cards in their hand. I understand and recognize that. I also recognize the inevitability that's being spoken of here, because it's absolutely correct. However, Strip Mine and Wasteland are readily accessible. There are about 1 million Wasteland variants running around at this point. Obsidian Charmaw is a 2-red 4/4 almost all the time. This card specifically reduces its converted mana cost. I don't see a reason for this card to be banned. And the reason I say that is I don't see this card as being more obnoxious to deal with than, say, Time Twister, which is the only piece of power that isn't banned. I've played Time Twister in Commander. It's a blast. I think unbanning Library would absolutely spike its value to the moon. I get that. You'd never be able to get a copy if you didn't have one already without shelling out at least 3-4 grand. But is it this inexorable death machine that nobody can deal with, particularly in a 4-player pod? I don't think so. I'm not seeing it. This is a very answerable card. It's no more busted than any number of things we've had running around the format to this point. I would say this is safe to come off. Limited resources. A white mana for an enchantment. When it comes into play, each player chooses 5 lands he or she controls and sacrifices the rest. As long as there are 10 or more lands in play, players cannot play lands. Multiplayer format easily becomes nobody gets lands until this is killed. This can stay banned. I don't even have to read the rules committee's justification here, though they point out it's probably the easiest card on the ban list to justify. It doesn't scale with the number of players, so as early as turn 2, it effectively reads players can't play any more lands on a 1-mana enchantment. On board, card can be banned forever. Lutri the Spellchaser. 1 and 2 hybrid blue-red mana. It's a 3/2 legendary creature elemental otter with companion. Each non-land card in your starting deck has a different name as its companion cost. It has flash. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. This card was banned on release of Ikoria because the deck building requirement is how you build commander decks. Now, granted, Companion's mana eroded, so you have to pay 3 mana at sorcery speed to add your companion to the hand, but as a companion, Lutri is just going to give decks playing blue-red an advantage that other decks won't have. Honestly, this is the card that justifies the need to have banned in a specific way. So if you banned Lutri as a companion, it would be perfectly fine as a commander or a card in the 99. It should just be banned as a companion. I would love to see that errata take place, because there were a lot of people upset they couldn't play this card, and otters are getting some attention in Bloomburrow, so I would be cool with giving them one more otter to play with who is designed to work with their mechanics. Please just adjust this to banned as a companion. Mana Crypt. So, 0 mana, tap, add 2 mana to your mana pool. Beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you call it incorrectly, it hits you for 3 damage. Mana Crypt is an extremely powerful accelerant which, if drawn in the first 2 turns, immediately moves its controller to mid-game spells. The drawback of losing an average of 1.5 life per turn is not a significant deterrent in a game which ends within 5 to 6 turns and starts with 40 life. It's banned to lower the number of available mana-positive rocks in the first few turns, and in doing so, decreases the frequency of extremely fast starts. This card has been legal in Commander since its inception. If Sol Ring is a part of Commander, I would argue Mana Crypt is too. You're just going to have to deal with it. This card should never have been banned. Banning it was an error. Is the format better with it gone? Yeah, I would say it is. There is no technically about it. But on the flip side of that, I've played a lot of Mana Crypts in my day. Of the 4 cards that were banned, this is the one I most fervently disagree with. If Sol Ring is your mascot for Commander, Mana Crypt should not be just treated as something you can dispose of. It's effectively the same thing, but a little better. And yeah, I get wanting to limit the number of mana positive rocks, but this is such a slippery slope to start walking down that I don't want to see us even tread down that slope. And it bugs me that Sol Ring gets a pass. Granted, it's been in every Commander precon since the beginning of time, so all of those become irrelevant if Sol Ring is banned. I get that. But Mana Crypt is a card people like playing with. And it's not so powerful that it was creating huge problems in the format, but it is a staple, which means it does mean that your deck is going to be 100 cards with your Commander, Sol Ring, and Mana Crypt. Your deck is just objectively better with this card in it. So I get why it's banned. The format is better with it gone, but I don't agree with its banning here, even though I understand it. But we don't ban other cards that have similar conditions. So I don't think we should ban this. I think it sends the wrong kind of message. So the Moxen, Mox Emerald, Jet, Pearl, Ruby, and Sapphire. These are 5 of the pieces of power. These should all stay banned. 0 mana for an artifact that creates colored mana. Colored mana is infinitely more powerful than colorless mana, and there's no deck building restriction to playing these, much like with Mana Crypt or Sol Ring. Colored mana is enough powerful, these need to stay gone. I don't have anything to add to that. I'm not really going to go into the details that the Rules Committee laid out because it's all the same stuff you've heard from Ancestral Recall and Black Lotus. But the power level of colored mana that comes down for 0 and basically lets you play an extra however many lands. It's kind of the best of Fastbond and Channel, just smashed together in artifacts, and artifacts have plenty of support in their own right. The Moxen can stay gone. Nadu, Winged Wisdom. 1 green and a blue for a 3/4 with flying. Creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's land, put it into the battlefield, otherwise put it in your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn, so basically each creature can be targeted twice, assuming you didn't blink them or put them back in your hand and recast them. Lightning Greaves and Shuko basically allow you to draw a million billion cards. This card has been beaten to death as a design mistake by the community and wizards alike. It can stay banned forever. I don't want to see this card ever again. Full stop. Panoptic Mirror. 5 mana for an artifact with imprint. X and tap. You may remove an instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost X in your hand from the game. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may copy an imprinted instant or sorcery card and play the copy without paying its mana cost. Now, Panoptic Mirror's presence on the ban list serves to remind players that most things are fun in moderation. It was and remains banned because of this incidental, often accidental uses which lead to repetitive, boring games. Beyond the obvious extra turns combo, it's a trap for casual deck builders because it seems like a fun value engine. However, too many different 4+ mana spells, when imprinted, will grind the game to a halt. Wraths, Tutors, Discard, even card draw can yield insurmountable advantage and lock up the game. So, you copy an imprinted instant or sorcery. 1. Yes, you can put multiple things on the mirror, but you only copy 1. Grind the game to a halt is not the word choice I would have used here. And yes, it obviously gives you infinite turns if you combine it with literally any extra turn spell. I get that. That's fine. I'm not sure I agree that this card needs to stay banned, because the best extra turn card is not legal in the format, but you could still play it with Savor the Moment, which is an extra turn spell for 3 mana that just skips your untap step. So there are ways to make this work in a busted, not fun capacity. I'm kind of torn on this one. This card is extremely obnoxious, but generally only in the extra turn capacity. Yes, if you put a tutor on it, it is powerful, but grind the game to the halt really isn't any different than all the tutoring and things we do now. I would be okay with seeing this card come off the list, but I'm also cool with leaving it on there because it does demand an answer, and there's often a very limited window you can answer it. Typically, it's one turn from when it's played, although there are ways to flash it out or reduce that window so that all you have to do is tap it, imprint the spell, and then off you go. I don't know that this card is as big a boogeyman as it was back in the early days when it was banned, and it was banned before I even really got into the format. And back then, it was a lot harder to deal with this card because Commander was a lot more of a battlecruiser format. You played big spells, and you played 3, 4, 5 hour games of Commander. This was a thing that happened all the time. 6, 7, 8 mana Commanders were common. They're not anymore. I don't know. I think this card might be eligible for parole. Paradox Engine. 5 mana for a legendary artifact. When you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. Paradox Engine can be played in any deck and creates large amounts of mana at little to no deck building cost. Its play patterns often involve long drawn-out turns of tapping and untapping permanents, drawing cards, and generally monopolizing the chess clock of a game. This is an example of a 5 mana artifact that should be banned. Its power level grossly exceeds Panoptic Mirror. And I've been on both sides of the battlefield of this one. I have played Paradox Engine. I have played against Paradox Engine. A player who resolves Paradox Engine is about to do something extremely unfair. Typically, I played this in my colorless commander deck to get my Kozilek Butcher of Truth out far faster, and then be able to get the rest of the Eldrazi that were sitting in my hand out in quick order. Card is super busted. Paradox Engine should stay banned for now. And it's not to say that it couldn't ever come off, but I think it's the type of card that's only going to get better the more mana rocks get printed. And as more get printed, the power level of this card keeps going up. The floor goes up, the ceiling goes up. I think it's unlikely it could come back. Primeval Titan. 6 mana for a 6/6, 4 and 2 green. With Trample, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Super efficient at ramping cards, especially if you give it haste. This card ends games without people realizing it ends games a lot of the time. Because if you get the best 4 lands in your deck out in one turn, next turn you are untapping with at least 10 lands most of the time. You might have access to things like Cabal Coffers and Urborg if you're playing green and black together. You might have Yavimaya and Vernal Bloom going, so you have access to double green. This card is absurd. I don't think it will ever come off because, much like the Paradox Engine, this card gets better the more non-basic lands come out and the more the design of non-basic lands are pushed, and they're really getting pushed these days. Not to the degree of something like Gaia's Cradle, which this card can also fetch, but enough so that there are lots of good things you could go get even if you were in mono green. I don't think Primeval Titan's ever coming off, nor should it. Prophet of Kruphix. 3 a green and a blue for a 2/3 that says untap all creatures and lands you control during each other player's untap step. You may cast creature cards as though they had flash. Prophet of Kruphix creates a gameplay pattern where the controller of the card can interact and meaningfully play during each other player's turn. This inevitability leads to one player monopolizing playtime without definitively ending the game. Now, this was a card that was largely banned due to community outcry. This card, back in the era that it was printed in Theros block, was very, very strong. Seedborn Muse was basically a staple of the format at the time, and Prophet of Kruphix just came in alongside it and did everything Seedborn did, while stapling effectively a Leyline of Anticipation to a solid chunk of the cards in your hand. In today's era, I'm not convinced that this card should still be on the banned list. Cards have gotten a lot more powerful. You can Lightning Bolt this off the table, and Lightning Bolt sees increased play these days, as does Ghostfire Slice in our play groups. I don't see a reason why Prophet should still be on the ban list. I think its power level has largely been eclipsed. It's still a very good card. The decks that want it will still abuse it in many of the same ways. But I don't think the power level's there anymore. At least not to put it on ban list status. I think there's so many better things you could do with 5 mana. Recurring Nightmare. 2 and a black for an enchantment. Sacrifice a creature. Return Recurring Nightmare to owner's hand. Put target creature card from your graveyard into play. Play it as a sorcery. So, outside of counter magic, it's nearly impossible to stop this card from doing its thing once it gets going, because returning it to its owner's hand is part of the cost of activating its ability. If your graveyard is sufficiently stocked, it's entirely possible that once you draw Recurring Nightmare, it's the only spell you'll want to play for the rest of the game. Yeah, that's valid. This is effectively a 1-card loop once your graveyard is stocked, and it is not hard to generate silly amounts of black mana. Or put creatures in your bin thanks to Survival of the Fittest, which was its partner in crime during the block it was printed in. Card's busted, card should stay gone. It is too cheap for what it does. Chthonian Nightmare is the fixed version that came out recently. It uses energy to mitigate what you can do with this effect, and I think that adding that resource to it has made it a much more reasonable card overall. It's still quite powerful once you get it going, but it's nowhere near as busted as the unrestricted version in Recurring Nightmare. Cool with this staying banned. Raphelos, Llanowar Emissary. 2 mana for a 2/1 legendary elf. Tap, add a green mana to your mana pool for each forest you control. Raphelos is unique in its ability to consistently provide access to 6 mana on turn 3 as a commander, regardless of which cards are played in the rest of the deck. Card is banned for doing too much, too fast with minimal deck building restrictions, further reduced by the fact that Yavimaya Cradle of Growth exists. Which is not a sentence on the page, but I'm just going to say it, because it will just basically make this the best mana dork you could be playing in your deck, not close. Card should stay banned. Sherazade. I'm not going to read the whole effect of Sherazade, but the long and the short of it is, for 2 white mana, you set aside all the cards on the table, as does everybody else. You grab your deck, you deal out a fresh 7, and you play a magic minigame. Whoever loses the minigame loses half their life, and then you go back to the main game. I'm not going to lie, I am among those people who would love to build a deck with Scheherazade and a bunch of forks and just make people concede or play out the longest efficient burn deck as far as mana is concerned in red-white. But this is the type of card that will make a 3-hour commander game easily a weekend-long commander game. It really should not be part of the format. Sundering Titan. 8 mana for a 7/10 artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield or leaves the battlefield, choose a land of each basic land type, then destroy those lands. So, this card is strong. There are many lands that players would love to see leaving the battlefield, but Sundering Titan doesn't target those. Decks that blink or bounce Sundering Titan can utilize its effect repeatedly, leading to an environment where it's nearly impossible for opponents to keep basic lands in play. Basic land destruction is a predictably unpopular mechanic, especially in an environment where you don't know the people you're playing against. And again, while this says basic lands, this is a description that neglects the fact that they should have said basic land types, because this hits shocklands, this hits triomes, this hits the surveil lands. It is not hard to wipe out 5 lands on a rotation just because of those cards being in every deck, basically. Card is not fun to play against because it is just going to hammer a lot of lands. And it doesn't matter if you're forced to hit 1 or 2 of your own in the process, because you're doing so much more damage to color access and consistency of your opponent's field that you're going to come out ahead every time with this, and that's if you just play it for 8 mana. It gets even dumber if you cheat it into play early, or if you blink it, or do other silly things, especially if you're in colorless. I don't think this is a card that should come off the list, because it's just not a fun card to deal with. Sway of the Stars, 8 and 2 blue for a sorcery. Each player shuffles his or her hand, graveyard, and permanents he or she owns into his or her library and draws 7 cards. Each player's life total becomes 7. This is basically Biorhythm, but slightly more fair. Casting Sway of the Stars has the effect of completely negating the game that was in progress before its resolution, adds time to the game, and takes away action. You might as well shuffle up and play a new game. Pretty much. I have nothing to add to that. Should stay banned. Sylvan Primordial, 5 and 2 green for a 6/8 with reach. When it enters the battlefield for each opponent, destroy target non-creature permanent that player controls. For each permanent destroyed this way, search your library for a forced card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. This was supposed to be the fixed Primeval Titan, and I know you can't see me air quoting fixed. There we go. Fixed. This is another card that should never have seen print as it was written. This card is dumb. This is... If Emrakul was banned because games devolved into finding it, cloning it, whatever, this card was banned for that reason, but, by an order of magnitude more. I have played in so many games where it was a race to Sylvan Primordial, and then how many times you could copy it, basically, to wipe out your opponent's lands, pull all the lands out of your deck, basically, and just go to town. Card's dumb, card should stay banned, it's not fun. Time Vault, 2 mana, tap. Gain an additional turn after this one. Time Vault doesn't untap until you skip a turn to untap it. And it enters the battlefield tapped. It's a card that saw many changes to its rules text over the years in an attempt to remove the ability to easily take infinite turns with simple untap effects like Voltaic Key or Twiddle. Wizards finally reverted the card to its printed and broken text just prior to its banning in Commander. Yeah, this card would be a staple. This card is busted. Unwinding Clock basically gives you infinite turns. Yeah, no. Time Walk, 2 mana, take an extra turn after this one. This is one of the Power 9. It has all the same banning restrictions. It is the most powerful of the Power 9 that are banned here, I think, in Commander specifically. Not to say that Lotus and Moxen wouldn't be fighting it for that spot, but 2 mana extra turn is just, particularly in blue, where you have access to a million extra turn effects already, but not for this cheap. It just will set you up so far ahead. Tinker! One of my favorite cards, 2 and a blue. When you play Tinker, sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card and put that artifact into play. Shuffle your library afterwards. Tinker's ability to get high-cost artifacts into play in the very early game often results in games ending extremely quickly or being locked down to the point where players cannot interact meaningfully. Because Tinker's power is tied to the artifacts that are being cheated into play, its power increases over time as artifact designs become more powerful, and it was already pretty busted when it got banned in 2009. Card is ridiculous. It basically circumvents the mana system in its entirety. You can trade out a Darksteel Citadel for a Darksteel Forge, or a Sundering Titan, or a Darksteel Monolith, or whatever crazy high-powered artifact you want to put in the field, a Blightsteel Colossus. Card is way too efficient at what it does. It can't come back. Tolarian Academy. Legendary land, tap, add a blue to your mana pool for each artifact you control. Same deal, too efficient for what it does. Honestly, I would kind of like to see Gaia's Cradle go with this at this point, and probably Sarah's Sanctum just to be consistent. All of those lands are kind of busted, but Tolarian Academy is the easiest to abuse because mana rocks typically cost 0 or 1 mana, so you can tap this for an absurd amount of mana, colored mana at that, very quickly. Trade Secrets, 1 and 2 blue for a sorcery. Target opponent draws 2 cards, then you draw up to 4 cards. That opponent may repeat this process as many times as he or she chooses. Trade Secrets is a flag bearer for the banning principle of cards which interact poorly with the multiplayer nature of the format, as it's a cheap spell that allows 2 players to collude, draw unlimited cards, and then box the other players out of the game. Yep, no notes, needs to stay banned. Amazed it lasted to 2013. Upheaval, 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery, return all permanents to their owner's hands. Games of Commander are expected to go long. It's not uncommon to see players cast spells for 10 plus mana. Upheaval is both an emergency reset, which leaves the game right back at square one, and a way to get way ahead in the game by floating mana. Bouncing everything, then replaying your hand while leaving everyone else stuck at nothing, giving no real way to interact with it besides counter magic. Yep. Card is not fun to play against, much like most land destruction, and does not always have the decency to end the game. And in blue, where you're already stocked with a suite of counter magic to protect this, I understand this card being banned. Is it worse than mass land destruction like Armageddon at this point? Or Ravages of War? Boom bust? I'm torn on that. Effectively, you're going to be playing each of those mass land destructions alongside a board wipe of some capacity anyway. This is both in one card, so I guess that does make it somewhat worse. But we got Worldfire unbanned relatively recently, and that card is effectively the same thing, except it sets everybody's life total to 1. If we can handle a world with Worldfire, should Upheaval still be banned? Should Worldfire be put back on the ban list? That's a topic for another video. I'm cool with Upheaval staying banned. This is another card that is banned, but there's not consistent reasoning for its banning. And finally, Yawgmoth's Bargain. 4 and 2 black for an enchantment. Skip your draw step, pay a life, draw a card. Banned for basically the same reasons as Griselbrand. Commander's high life total basically makes the life payment trivial. You get the cards right away. You're probably going to win the game on the spot if you get this resolved in a timely fashion. Black has plenty of ways to steal life from players and gain its own life. I'm cool with this being banned. It is honestly more obnoxious than Necropotence despite costing twice as much mana. Because again, with Necropotence, yes, you can draw a gajillion cards, but you don't get them until the end of your next turn. This should probably stay banned. So ultimately, the cards that I feel can come back off the ban list at this point: Chaos Orb if it was eroded to be single target. Falling Star under the same constraints. Iona, I think probably could. Jeweled Lotus probably could. Library of Alexandria definitely could. Lutri the Spell Chaser if it was only banned as a companion. Mana Crypt. Possibly Panoptic Mirror. Definitely Prophet of Grufix. And that's pretty well it. I think ultimately those are the ones that could come off the list at this point. Whether they will or not when the ban list is reviewed in detail, whatever's going to be added to it, I don't know. If you'd like to see me do a video talking more about that, please feel free to leave a comment below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do that as well. It's very much appreciated, and I'll see you next time.